Charlie says, always tell your mummy before you watch one of Grimm's videos, because he swears a lot.
Hello, lovelies. Welcome to this week's pretentious pseudo-intellectual content. Periodically, I'm asked to create some sort of book of GM advice, but this is a market which is already flooded with bad advice and bullshit and things that sound good but aren't really practical, unfortunately. I think there is a space, a need for some sort of slightly more advanced help and assistance with various aspects of games mastering, but the market is so flooded with trash, and I include YouTube unfortunately on that score, that it's hard to see how it's worth making the effort for what would only appeal to a very small audience, or what would only reach a very small audience. But a lot of people do ask me to share the secret of how I do X or Y thing in my games. And the trouble is, at this point, that a great deal of what I do is instinctual, or whatever the mental equivalent of muscle memory is, regular memory, I guess, but it's not really conscious a lot of the time. I'm not saying it's like pure talent and something people can't learn or whatever. It's practice. It is getting on for 40 years of practice, right? Anyway, this creates a bit of a problem, because so many of the things that I do are subconscious or instinctual, or have been kind of ground into my brain over so many years. Thinking about how or why I do what I do and what I actually do, identifying it can all be a bit unreliable. Am I actually doing the things that come to mind when I analyse myself, or is that just kind of post hoc rationalisation of what I do, or what I think, or what I think about what I think? It's difficult. Creating and portraying NPCs strongly and consistently is a huge challenge for games masters, especially new games masters who are adapting to a lot all at once, especially considering the lack of confidence that a lot of new games masters have, especially when we see so many polished and professional podcasts and things. It can seem very intimidating. I believe I've tackled this before, but I wasn't really happy with it, so I've come back around to it and given it some more thought. But any advice is only good if you do consciously put it into practice and do it enough that it becomes that instinct and reflex to you as well. But I have given this some more thought. I want to have a second bash at it. Portraying NPCs is tricky, especially if they're repeat NPCs. And as a games master, you are portraying all the monsters, the world, incidental people they meet on the street, key villains, incidental characters. It's a lot to keep track of, and so it's difficult. I would start with backstory, by which I don't mean any sort of epic novel or anything. Every NPC has a life before they ran into the players. This doesn't have to be something dramatic, sweeping, or detailed. It's probably better if it isn't. The point here is not to write a novel or for a character's background to pass any sort of deep scrutiny. It's simply to situate the NPC within the world around them and to provide some sort of cue, some sort of clue as to where they fit into the structure of the world, in very broad terms. For more important NPCs, you can ground them further and provide more detail if you want, but what I mean here can be something as simple as whether they're from a rural or an urban background, their social class, whether they're a follower or a leader, an outcast or a pillar of the community. One or two words on their personality and position. Really, that's all you need. Every NPC has a voice, a way of speaking, gestures, verbal tics. These are reusable across different NPCs, and you can have stock characters. A lot of old theatre used to have that, but it does help to have something that can individually identify a recurring NPC, something that can give away when you switch modes between narrator describing what's going on and portraying an NPC. You can do voices and accents if you want, but there are other tricks to creating subtle changes in the way you speak and what comes across from that. Holding a different facial expression or tension in a different part of your body, speaking from a different place, from speaking in your throat to speaking from your diaphragm. There are a lot of voice actors on social media or with TikTok accounts where you can see how when they switch characters, they hold their body differently, they tense up in different ways, they change their facial expression. Yeah, and that does make a sometimes subtle, but it does make a big and impactful difference if you want to portray people of a different voice. So you can scribble a little note, do they have a catchphrase? Do they have a particular way of speaking? That sort of thing. Even the most basic NPC has some sort of motivation. The innkeeper wants this wandering band of murder hobos to behave and then leave. The shopkeeper wants to make as much money as possible. The goblin wants to survive the next 5 minutes. You don't necessarily have to be super detailed on any of this, and it can be as simple as what I've already stated. But the NPC's actions and dialogue should be slanted towards that particular end. So the innkeeper might be reluctantly accommodating, the shopkeeper is constantly eyeing their purses and pointing them towards the more expensive gear and whatever that they have. You can make NPCs a hell of a lot deeper and more nuanced by including a second motivation. Maybe the innkeeper is also very protective of his daughter and wants to keep her away from the adventurers, and so he angles things towards that. Maybe the shopkeeper is being extorted by a local gang, and so disinclined to cut anyone a deal or barter on his prices at all. Generally speaking, that two-step motivation is more than enough for the majority of circumstances, and it's maybe as little as 2 words. Not every interaction with an NPC needs to be a flawless command performance. In regular speech, we repeat ourselves, we stumble over words, we get nervous, we trail off without finishing our point, we lose track of what it is that we're saying, we babble long run-on sentences. This isn't a play. You don't have to deliver a perfect monologue in a Shakespearean mould, and if you do need to deliver a monologue, it's fine to write it ahead of time and then read it off. But naturalistic dialogue is fine too. Is better, it's more immersive in many ways. You can even pause for long moments to gather your thoughts, make that one of the tics of the character if you find them difficult. Take a moment, think about how the NPC might properly react, because that's what we do in real life as we think about things. We pause, we consider, and then we give our answer. Long pauses, even to the point of it becoming uncomfortable, are also natural and can be effective tools when you're dialoguing with the players as an NPC. If you're going to revisit this non-player character, and if anything significant happens that might change their attitude and so on going into the future, then it's worth making a little note of that fact, maybe on a post-it note or something stuck into the book, wherever that NPC is, or in a card index, or on your computer, in a local wiki or something, or whatever it is that you use to keep track of everything. It's worth making a little note, because you almost certainly won't remember. You have enough to keep track of without worrying about that. Players have a way of throwing a monkey wrench into just about anything that a games master does, and interactions with NPCs are no exception. However much prep and thought that you've put into it, or not, players will screw with it. So take a breath, recenter, mentally go back through who and what this NPC is, and adapt them as necessary. Taking that pause, taking that moment, you can also take that moment to put yourself in the non-player character's shoes, to imagine their situation and to picture it, to remind yourself of all the other elements before you launch into the portrayal of this character. You can immerse yourself in the experience of the NPC and let yourself feel what they might be feeling in the moment, or recall a time that you've felt that way. Have you ever worked in retail? Challenge that for the shopkeeper. Have you ever worked in service? Channel that for the innkeeper. These things can really help sell the character and give it an underlying authenticity, and can also subtly encourage the players to up their game slightly and to immerse and to roleplay themselves. All of this would fit easily on an index card or a post-it note, and yet it can potentially add a huge amount to interactions that players have with NPCs. So hopefully all that provides some assistance and advice that you can actually use, simple but effective, trying to vocalize and set down things that mostly come from experience and instinct at this point. It's difficult. It's not a magic formula, nor is it the only way to do these things, but I dare to think that you might actually find it effective and useful. What other things do you think you might need help and advice with? What other topics would you like to see me tackle with the same pseudo-intellectual bent and pretentious rigour as I have here and the other things in previous weeks? Let me know in the comments, and who knows, maybe it'll turn up. If you sub to my Patreon, you'll get my ear a lot better. Zang.
Flick pig. There's no big story to this, even the title's just a way to get away with writing fuck pig. It's not some earth-shaking attempt to thrust upon you the evils of meat eating. I eat meat because it's fucking delicious. David Cameron got me thinking about pigs. Then I got into some arguments with vegans. Then I made a horror dungeon game in which you play pigs trying to escape a horrible, fantastical slaughterhouse. That's about it. If that upsets you, do one. A print-and-play OSR dungeon crawl with pigs. Available at post-mort.com and drive-thru RPG.
I don't wanna